The Summer Slam 2022 was a combination of 3 incredible races that took place on back-to-back-to-back weekends in July. This race was made possible by 3 of the best race directors who organized their events as to not take place on conflicting weekends. The rules were simple. Take part in all 3 races and you get to take home an amazing trophy by Wicked Skins Athletics. For the Vero Beach Octopus Ultra, there were many distance options that counted, ranging from 50k up to 100 miles. For the Skunk Ape Night Run, it was simple, 18 miles through the Green Swamp Wilderness Preserve. And finally, the Trident. Choices were a marathon over sand dunes or a grueling 12-hour elimination race. If you're interested, you will be able to find detailed race recaps for each individual event linked below that go into far greater detail than this video. I intend this video to be a semi-quick overview of the events, linking all the races together and giving an insight into why I chose the races I plan to take part in. I give some details about how I personally performed, but I try to focus the attention on the events rather than myself, but because I'm a bit of a narcissist, I might not always succeed. For me, I was going to first conquer the entire Octopus. A year ago, I had taken on 50 miles of the Octopus, making it the first race I'd ever competed in. I came in 3rd overall, and my obsession with ultras was sparked. My goal after completing the race in 2021 was to run the full course in 2022, so it was looking like my Summer Slam would begin with 100 miles in Vero Beach. Next was the Skunk Ape 30k Night Run and pot luck. I was excited for a single loop around the Green Swamp, having run the 60k version back in February. I was intending for this to be a nice slow race, focused on just making it through uninjured so I could be fresh for the Trident, but as you'll see, I deviated from my plan a bit. Finally, the Trident. A year ago, this was the 2nd race I ever participated in, and like the Octopus, I had been looking forward to coming back a year later and testing my progress. I was torn between the Ridge to Nowhere, which was the 12-hour event, and the traditional marathon, but I ended up choosing the marathon. My decision was guided by the thought of running 100 miles just 14 days prior, and I wasn't sure if I would be healthy enough to survive 12 hours straight over those sand dunes. So, with that overview, let's hop back to July 16th for the Vero Beach Octopus Ultra. As I mentioned, the first race for my personal Summer Slam journey would be 100 miles through Vero Beach. This race was the perfect way for me to begin because it was my #1 race for the year and the one that I was willing to risk injury for completing. The allure of the Octopus is probably the difficulty of braving the summer heat, combined with no aid stations other than the aptly named Octobase. For the earlier sections of the race, there are plenty of crew on the course that were very generous and helpful, but the longer distances eventually result in seeing fewer runners and crew on course that can provide aid in the event of a miscalculation or emergency. Another feature of the Octopus is the different terrain the race covers. In the first 50 kilometers, runners will traverse a few miles of the beautiful Florida beaches, travel the roads of A1A along manicured lawns and trees, stumble through mangrove-lined, slightly mowed trails which resembled being baked in an oven, and enjoy a boat crossing over the Indian River, which includes running around an island. This is truly a unique race and provides an incredible experience. Finally, the Octopus gets its name from the 8 out and backs, or arms, that all begin and end at the center, or the Octobase. This year the base was hosted by the Environmental Learning Center, which allowed a generous infield where tents could be set up. The race began at 6 a.m. with runners for all distances starting out at once. Octo Arm 1 is a 14.5 mile loop that takes runners out for a 4-mile stretch on the beach, then on to A1A, down a short stretch of jungle trail, and finally over the Roboso Bridge and back to the Octobase. The beach was beautiful and an excellent way to start this journey for all distances. Last year, this arm was actually a tough 26.2 miles, so the shorter distance was greatly appreciated and I believe improved the experience of the Octopus overall. Next, Octo Arm 2 was a trip inland, taking runners to a small kayak launch area where 2 boats were taking runners out to a trip to Hole in the Wall Island. Before your boat trip, a ticket needed to be acquired by running a short loop right before the boat launch. This small loop was a taste of what would be expected on Arm 3, taking runners through a partially manicured trail surrounded by mangroves that trapped the heat in and prevented any sort of breeze. This trip to, around, and back from the island was an incredible experience and one that I did not expect when I began running ultras. It was nice to sit and enjoy the water, relaxing and rehydrating. The island itself had some recently mowed trails, and the trip around was a quick 2 miles. Arm 3 was the one I had been mentally preparing for all day. This was the arm that almost ended my 2021 Octopus race, as I was not prepared for the lack of airflow on this trail section. Many runners will assume a 6 mile out and back will be the easy part of the day, but this arm can really sneak up on you if you're not prepared. Fortunately, I had built up this monster in my head, and in reality, my heat training and dedication to hydration made this mountain into a molehill. A highlight of Arm 3 would have to be the dock visit, where I was greeted by watermelon and a beautiful view of a river. Arm 3 marks the end of the 50K, so here's where the number of active runners on the course began to diminish. Arm 4 saw runners take on Jungle Trail and A1A during the hottest part of the day. Jungle Trail begins with a canopy of trees, but quickly turns into an unshaded oven. This is still a beautiful section, but the heat and lack of breeze is physically draining. Once off Jungle Trail, A1A is an entirely different beast. While the breeze is welcome, the soft trail that was seen on Jungle Trail is traded for pavement, and the little shade that was to be found is now gone. Another thing to mention is that the course is still highly populated at this point, with many 50 mile, 100k, and 100 mile runners and crew still being present. It's hot, it's miserable, but you're all suffering together. After the turnaround point, the trip south down A1A and Jungle Trail seems longer than the way out, but before long, Bridge Boulevard comes into sight, and it's just a short trip back to the Octobase. Heading out onto Octo 5 is intimidating. There's noticeably fewer tents at the Octobase, and the number of runners participating in the 100k and 100 mile distances are far less, so for me, a sense of loneliness started creeping in. Arm 5 takes place on Jungle Trail, but this time heading south and ending up in a beach access that prevents runners with their second and final trek on the sand. Though this is only a total of 2 miles on the beach, the length of the race presents itself, and it definitely felt longer than 2 miles. Once off the beach, it's right back on Jungle Trail and right back to the Octobase. Next was Arm 6. Arm 6 was difficult, mainly due to the course being entirely on the road and nighttime fully setting in and reducing visibility. A trip down US 1 and Indian Harbor Boulevard takes runners past parks, crowded bars, and finally to a cemetery. I'm not sure if the other runners found the cemetery spooky, but my feet were in excruciating pain, so I might have welcomed a ghost attack and the sweet embrace of death. The trip back to the Octobase was as hard as getting out, passing bars with music and the smell of food. I almost stopped at a bar to get some beer and some fried food, but figured that would add a lot of time to the race, and I'm not sure they would have appreciated the way that I smelt. Arm 7 took runners east past the Jungle Trail entrance and north onto A1A. Runners would then run on A1A out to the Sebastian Inlet. Right before the Sebastian Inlet State Park, runners took a trail out to the park, make a quick lap, and return to the entrance. This trail was home to gigantic spiders who made webs right in the middle of the trail, so keeping an eye out for them was stressful, an experience I'd rather not relive. After exiting the trail, it was a trip south on A1A until the entrance to, you guessed it, Jungle Trail again. I absolutely love Jungle Trail, but I got enough of it during this race to last a lifetime, or maybe at least until I take on the Octopus again next year. As much as I wanted to rest, the sun was beginning to rise, and since I didn't want to be stuck on Jungle Trail in the heat, I pressed on and returned to the Octobase, getting ready to take on the final arm. Arm 8 was a short 1 mile trek down to Bridge Boulevard, to the fire station, and right back to the Octobase. This short stretch contains 2 up and overs of the Wabasso Bridge, which definitely sucked, but the adrenaline of being so close to finishing canceled out the pain, and at least that's how I'm choosing to remember it. I thought a final 2 mile stretch at the end of the race was going to be tedious, but it actually seemed like kind of a victory lap, and it was a fun way to end this difficult race. Finishing the Octopus was amazing, but my feet hurt and looked like hell, and I had doubts that I was going to complete the Summer Slam. Luckily, once my feet dried off, the majority of the skin looked fine, and while the blisters were large, they appeared to be manageable. After a day or 2 of hobbling around, I motivated myself to go for a run, and was surprised at how well I moved for just having finished a 100-mile race. After a few more days of foot care and another few shakeout runs, I was to take on the next challenge, the Skunk Ape 30K Night Run. Taking place a week after the Octopus on July 23rd, Skunk Ape was my Just Survive race. This race is also known for its potluck, so I'm not ashamed to admit I was looking forward to the food and beer more than running 18 miles through the swamp on tired legs. The first 4 miles of the race take place on what I believe is a service road, having some dips that were perfect for capturing standing water. After a turnaround, runners are taken back the way they came, where the course branches off onto the Florida Trail. This is where the race really starts for me, because I love the narrow, winding trail, which is such a contrast from the open service road. The trail is really amazing and cycles between narrow, tree-lined sections and wider, open, sweeping views. There's even a sandy section that reminded me in a week I'd be taking on the sand dunes of the Trident, but in order to get there, I'd have to finish Skunk Ape first. Finally, after another service road, runners hit the lollipop-ish loop that take us over sand and dirt loosely held together by some grass and weeds. Earlier in the year, this loop was entirely sand, so while it took a lot of energy out of me, I knew it could have been way worse. After the loop, runners saw another trip on the trail, and then finally the last service road, where runners could make up time on this 3-mile straightaway, if they had any energy left. Once off this road, a short section of trail is followed until the last obstacle, bushes and thorns. I honestly didn't know where I was supposed to go due to how overgrown the trail was, but I shone my light ahead and made my way directly to each of the flags marking the course. Left, right, I had absolutely no clue. I just hit each of those flags and checkpoints. Finally, runners made their way toward the illuminated finish line, where the food was waiting. The food and conversation post-race at Skunk Ape was awesome, and the cherry on top was that I ended up coming in 5th place. I knew I should have taken it easier and saved energy for the Trident, but I wanted to prove to myself and to everyone else that I wasn't just coasting through the Summer Slam for a participation trophy. The following week was spent much like the previous, taking a few days off before getting back out, and a few short runs to keep me limber. I was excited for the Trident because all of the runners that placed ahead of me last year in the marathon were running the Ridge to Nowhere, so I actually had a high chance of achieving a podium. This was a double-edged sword though, because I felt like I was ducking the harder race, but at the time I really had no idea how my legs would hold up, so I stood by my decision to play it safe for this final race. So, for the final race of the Summer Slam, let's jump to July 30th, 2022, where I take on the Marathon de las Muertes. On paper, the Trident seems easy, and the pictures make it look like a nice sunny day running on some sandy trails. In reality, this bastard is miserable, but the kind of miserable where you can't help but smile as you're getting your ass kicked. For a breakdown on why this race is so tough, I highly encourage you to at least watch the intro of my Trident video, again, link down in the video description. All events of the Trident begin together right at noon. No morning start time, that'd be way too easy. One of the cruelest parts of this race that runners don't realize is the climb right at the beginning. It's only about 30 or 40 feet, but many runners have early race adrenaline and run this section especially hard. It will inevitably come back to haunt you, but that's a problem for future you. In fact, to me, most of the first lap is actually pretty easy, and many runners will see the first lap as their fastest and least painful for the day. After about a mile, runners will hit the first aid station that at least on the first loop they'll probably blow right by. Again, if you're not familiar with this race, you'll think that the aid stations, one at the start and finish, and one at each prong, seem extremely excessive. But just wait. On the way to the second prong, runners will see their first steep descent, but this loop has a quick turnaround, so you'll be right back up and on your way to prong 3. Prong 3 is a bit longer than prong 2, and sees a decent stretch of trail with no sand. After prong 3, it's right back to the start, and that marks one loop complete with 3 more to go. Loop 2 is where you start to realize why the race is considered so tough, as those short climbs on the dunes seem longer, and the aid stations start seeming further apart. Loop 3 is where alarm bells begin ringing, and you swear an act of God has made the course longer somehow. At Loop 4 you'll swear off running forever, until you realize that you still need to run the nighttime half marathon as well to avoid a DNF. When I finished the first half last year, I felt close to death, but this year I was actually pretty fresh. I was second overall, being only a few minutes behind. Since total time for the marathon is the sum of the two halves, I knew there was an equally high chance of coming in first place as there was dropping third, so I carved up with some pizza and some beer and rested for the night half. The night half starts at 8 p.m. sharp with a noticeable drop in temperature. The main benefits of the night race is that it only gets cooler as the event goes on, so running in the dark is a welcome trade. The course feels completely different at night, and it would honestly be a little eerie if not for the dozens of other runners out there with you. For me, the night half was much easier, though I still saw positive splits due to the sand draining all the energy and power from my legs. The last lap of my marathon was sort of a victory lap. The runner who came in first place during the day was only a few minutes ahead of me, and the runner who came in third was a few minutes behind. This meant that as long as I maintained my current pace, I would have second place secured. The last lap still sucked really bad, but mentally, I was excited to finish the Summer Slam with a podium finish. I decided to run the last 50 yards of the race hard, and you can hear my reaction as my legs cramped up completely crossing the finish line.
Oh, come on, calf. Thank you. Ooh, wait, calf.
It took me a few minutes to realize the SummerSlam was complete, and that this finish not only marked the end of today's race, but also all 3 races that took place within 14 days of each other. It is really wild to think back to the SummerSlam and all the races that took place in July. The physical stress of racing was high, but the mental stress was what surprised me the most. It took an entire week off to get excited about running again, and I'm still trying to process the upcoming adventures I have planned. There was also a high stress placed on my family, both in having me travel 3 weekends in a row for races, plus the recovery immediately following each race. I need to thank my wife for watching our kids and allowing me to indulge in this crazy, ridiculous hobby of mine. For now, I'm going to get back to training and focus on preparing for the rest of the year's races. It's honestly too early to tell if I'll do the SummerSlam again next year. I would really like to volunteer or crew runner at Vero Beach and help someone find success in their 100-mile journey. I'd also like to try seeing how well I'd do at the Ridge to Nowhere with some dedicated training and tapering. As always, I hope you enjoyed this recap, and I thank you very much for watching the whole video. I love sitting down and reliving my adventures, and if I inspire at least one person to go out and do some crazy shit, then I'll consider these videos a success.